Zerg Death Knight is a powerful archetype that was introduced in the mini set of Starcraft. The idea behind the deck is that you want to be getting Infestor online as soon as possible and using buffs such as the Yodeler or Death Growl or the Viper or Buccaneer to give it extra times that the Infestor activate goes on. You then will be able to overwhelm your opponent with minions that are quite large, such as your Zerglings. The cards you want to mulligan for in this deck, there's just two, which is Spawning Pool and the Infestor. If you already have Infestor in your opening hand, you can also keep Buccaneer, but in general, the main mulligans are the Spawning Pool and the Infestor. A combo turn that you can have using this deck is using the Infestor along with the second activator, the Spawning Pool, which allows it to have Rush. And then once you have the Rush going, you can use that along with things such as Viper to be able to use the combo a few times by able to hit into a minion. It refreshes, it gives Reborn to the Infestor, then Reborn again when you use it. There's also in this deck the Orbital Moon, which is able to give your minions Lifesteal, Taunt, and Reborn if you use the card next to it. And the idea behind that is you can use it to help get back your health using the Baneling, or you can use it to get an extra proc for your Infestor by attaching it to the Infestor and then putting Reborn onto it. Going into the gameplay footage, I am currently playing against a Priest. The Priest is Priest in general is going to be a relatively easy matchup for this as long as you aren't versing the aggro version and if you also do get your Infestor quite early. The win rate of this deck does fall down significantly if you do not have Infestor. So the idea behind this, the plays that I'm doing is I'm trying to get as much, as likely as I can to get the Infestor out. I've also put down the Orbital Moon onto my Brood Queen, because Brood Queen can help you obviously get your Infestor, but it's giving me lifesteal as well to be able to defend against my opponent's minions. And since I'm running relatively low on health, it is important that I'm making sure that I'm playing to my out for that. They end up using the trusty fishing rod to play down and then hit into my 3-5. But since I don't have any, since I don't have many minions on my board, I'm able to clear this relatively easily since they have to trade both the minions into mine to be able to take me out. And then it obviously puts up the extra health with my lifesteal that comes from it too. And then they just end up conceding. Going into this game, I'm playing against a Paladin. So with the Paladin, it's quite often that they're playing the Aggro Paladin with the Terran Aggro Paladin. But there's been a Paladin list that's been coming online lately that uses Lanessa, and then it uses the old combo package to be able to play against your opponent. In general, this matchup should be relatively easy if you as long as you do get the Infestor and Spawning Pool online, because you'll be able to overwhelm your opponent quite easily by having the extra buff minions and things like that, because they can only do a 3 damage AoE and everything else doesn't really clear too easily against you. So basically I just want to get Infestor and have 3 procs on it, and then that means that I'll be able to quite easily be able to overwhelm my opponent. Since they only just played down a 1-3, it's very unlikely they'll be able to trade into my Buccaneer. So I played it down for tempo and to establish into their 1-3. But with them going into turn 3, the only play they could potentially do is using the 3 mana weapon to be able to trade into me, but they end up not doing that. So it does then allow me to get my Infestor online with Reborn. And then I end up just going and proccing the Spawning Pool just to be able to get the extra buff online, just in case they have some sort of silence or something like that in their deck. Because it's not, because it's possible they could be running a silence or things like that for it. Obviously, it does also get my minions buffed up earlier, and it sets me up for a Viper turn if I want to as well. So I end up using my Infestor to go face, and then I play down the Viper. The Viper then obviously can trade into the minion that ends up coming out, and it does get me an extra buff for my Infestor and for all my other Zerglings as well. They end up just, like, Defense Crystal isn't one of the best hits, obviously, with Viper. Like, you're looking for things like Lanessa or things like that, but with it getting the extra proc, it does make it quite useful for me. They end up getting some of the best 3-drops that you can. Like, they got the 3-7 and the 3-4. Those are quite good ones. The 2-2 obviously is below average, but in reality, they did go quite well with what they needed to. I got an orbital moon here as well, which does mean which does put it as the that I can't use the combo at the moment for it. So because I had just the 7 drop next to it, like it would just give me taunt and lifesteal, but it wouldn't give me reborn. And getting reborn obviously is quite effective to make sure that you're dealing as much damage as you can into your opponent. I end up just trading, going face because they are going to have to trade into my Infestor, and they are starting to run quite low on health as well. Since I'll be able to go into my Karrigan turn in 2 turns anyway, I am sitting in a relatively strong position, especially since they're going to have to trade at least twice to be able to deal with my board, because they won't want to have to deal with the Yodeler if it does end up coming out with my Infestor that's on the board. They end up just trading into my Infestor with their Robocaller, and then they play another Robocaller down. The trade obviously is relatively decent for them, but in reality, I'm just trying to deal as much damage as I can to them because I was still under the impression that this was the aggro package that they have been playing lately. They end up just trading into my 2-1, which is fine, like it's not too much of an issue for me. And I do end up drawing Death Growl as well, which is quite good. I get another Viper as well, which is very useful for me too. And I end up just trading into the Starship, obviously, since it does have the taunt. I play down the Zergling as well, and then I put the Death Growl onto my Infestor and all my other minions that are there, and then I play the Viper down. This allows me to be able to get Reborn into the minion, obviously, and then I can trade quite easily into them. And since they don't have... Since I took away their Lanessa as well, it is quite likely they're not sitting in a very good position, so I end up just taking out their minions now, because with the Reborn minions on my board and their Lanessa is gone, it means that it's not likely they're going to be able to take me out now. And just trading makes sure that it's a lot safer for me, just in case they do end up having some sort of way to deal with my board. Next turn I'll be using Karrigan as well, so it does clear most of the minions that are on their board anyway. But they're in such a weak position that, and I'm in such a strong position that they do end up conceding. Okay, so going into this matchup, I am playing against a Hunter, so there are a few Hunter archetypes that have been going around. There's obviously the Zerg Hunter that uses the Discover package, and then there's also the the Zerg Hunter in particular, that's the main one, but there's also the Grunter Hunter as well that goes around. So I end up just doing a full mulligan for my hand, because once again I am just looking for Spawning Pool, and I am looking for Infestor. Those are the highest win rate cards. The other cards don't have extremely high win rates in comparison. So like Spawning Pool obviously gets you more Zerglings, but it also means that you get Rush on the Infestor, which obviously gets the big buff onto your guy. They end up just forging their secret, and then end up passing. I just end up going into my turn, and then what I'm going to be doing is, if they end up playing the secrets down this turn and they play it quite quickly, I'm assuming it's going to be an explosive trap. So since they end up clicking the secret quite quickly, then I do have the general assumption that it's going to be explosive trap, which is the reason why going into next turn, I'm not actually going to attack or anything like that, because if they do end up playing down a board, they I could potentially use these minions to trade into them. But it also means that if I get like Death Growl or Infestor or something like that, I can use them to trade quite well into them. So I end up just drawing an Airlock Breach, so I don't particularly have any sort of play, so I'm just using the hero power. It does give me an extra corpse proc as well, which is decent for me. I could have used the Runes of Darkness in this situation as well, but it's not really that important for me. They end up just playing down their Zerglings and their Hydralisks, so they are able to deal with my board that's here. Like it is a little bit frustrating that that's the case, but I end up just trading away my Snake Oil, and I get an Infestor, which is really good for me, because I can use the Infestor along with the Orbital Halo to be able to get the extra proc onto my, get the extra Reborn proc to occur. And then with the other Orbital Moon that I have, I can use that onto the Baneling to be able to clear their board if they end up going quite wide. So they end up just using the Nidus Worm, which is relatively decent for them. But then with the other Hydralisk, it does mean that I'm not able to get any more lifesteal coming from it too. So it means that my board is a little bit weaker going into them. They end up just trading into my Infestor as well, which doesn't really concern me too much. Like it's a decent play, but because my Infestor is going to be quite strong, that and make my Banelings become 3/3s, it doesn't really matter too much to me. I end up drawing the Yodeler, which is a fantastic draw here because it allows me to play my Baneling plus the Orbital Moon to be able to clear the board, but also get a bunch of lifesteal health back as well. So I end up using the Orbital Moon plus the Baneling, and then I use the Yodeler to be able to go twice onto each of the minions, which 15 plus 15 gives 30 health, so it recovers me back to full health again. And since I'm going into turn 6, I'll be able to use Karrigan to be able to deal with whatever they end up, to be able to play next turn. So going into this turn, it's just trade into the 3/3, and then I can use Karrigan to clear off the rest of the Titan. It does mean that they still have the weapon that's there, but it's obviously a lot weaker instead of them having the weapon proc for a lot, having the second hero ability going onto the weapon proc. They end up just playing down their Karrigan as well, so they're able to use that to take out my Yodeler, but the other cards, they'll be able to take out one with their weapon as well, but I'll still be left with a 4/4, which is relatively decent for me. So they end up just hitting into my 4/4. I do at this point in time also know that that is an explosive trap that they have on as their secret too, so it's something to be thinking about for it. They end up just using their spawning pool and then trade their Zerglings into me as well, so it also trades one of their Brood Queen procs into me too, which means that they're sitting in a relatively weak position going into next turn. So I end up just playing down my Buccaneer, and then I play down my Chillforge Baron to be able to draw me some extra cards. Obviously, having the Reborn is quite strong for me too. I play down the Infestor just because obviously that's going to be quite strong to be having with the Buccaneer, and since they don't really have too much damage posed on board at the moment, I'm sitting in a relatively decent position. And I still do have the 2 sets of lavas to be able to use in future turns too. They end up using their Forge, so this is going to be another set of secrets that they're going to be playing down in the next turn. So something that I need to be thinking about is Freezing Trap or Bait and Switch and things like that, since they still do have the Explosive Trap sitting on their hero at the moment. They end up just trading into my 2/1, which I think is perfectly fine, since they do then they're able to use the Ravage to be able to trade into my board as well. This obviously gets the extra buff going onto the Infestor, but when they play down their secret, it is quite likely they're going to have a Freezing Trap to deal with my Infestor. So when I do play the next turn, I need to make sure that I'm considering that option when I do play. Since they don't trade, they do just keep the Infestor alive, it is quite likely that they do have the Freezing Trap coming out of that. So I play down my Runes of Darkness. I'm hoping in this situation to be able to get, what was I hoping for? I was hoping to get the Lifesteal weapon, just to be able to deal with their board and also get some health back as well. But unfortunately, I didn't hit it. I used the Ravage, and then I just used my Airlock Breach. It means that I can just chill for a turn, because it gives me extra health, but it also puts Taunt minions onto the board for them. They end up getting their Hidden Meaning proc, which is perfectly fine since they don't get a particularly good 3-drop minion. But so what I'm assuming their secrets are now is, I know one is Explosive Trap, and I'm also assuming the other one is going to be Freezing Trap as well. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that when I'm doing my trades and things like that, that I'm not using the Infestor to trade unless I want to obviously get it to be sent back into my hand. I didn't want to use it that turn just in case I do get any buffs or things like that, but I could also use it to one of the taunts go into my hand rather than the Infestor. They end up getting a Grifter, which is quite strong for them, because they could have potentially gotten the one that takes control of an enemy minion, because if they're taking control of my Infestor there, they would have been able to get obviously the buff going onto all their minions, so it's a little bit lucky that I did get the extra bit off for that. The attack with my Taunt minion shows that it was a Freezing Trap, which I was assuming would be the case. I play down the Secret Studies because obviously it's, for most of my cards in my hand, there aren't really any spells that could be there. I could have potentially used the Baneling spell to be able to get the Banelings cheaper going into that turn as well. I end up using but with the cost of my cards, it's obviously better in that situation not to worry about it. I do also use the Hydralisk, so I wasn't really sure which would be the better way to use the Hydralisk, to use Hydralisk or to use Ravage. So I ended up just using it in that particular way. Obviously that turn does show that it would have been better using the spell before using the Baneling Barrage before using the Grifter spell, so that's a little bit of a missequence that I can adjust in future gameplay footage for me. They end up getting an Infestor with their Viper, with their Lava, but obviously it's not going to be too much for them since I do have quite a lot of buffs sitting on my minions. So I've currently got 5 Infestor procs sitting on my board, which is obviously quite strong going into them. And with the board that I have, I am sitting on lethal damage as well. So they, with their board state at the moment, they do play down that Lurker, since they don't have a spawning pool at the moment, it means that they're not really able to deal too much of a threat. They're not really too much of a threat towards me. They still do obviously have their Ravage hero power to be able to deal a little bit of damage, but it's not really too much for me to have to worry about. They end up trading their 2/3 into my taunt minion, and then use their spawning pool proc, which is perfectly fine. Like, it's not really too much of an issue for me to have to worry about. And then they end up playing down their Viper. Since I have a full board, they're not able to use it to trade into anything, so it's not really anything to worry about for me. They also get a bird watching here as well, but since I still do have lethal damage on the board, it just is going to be our game at the end of this. And then they end up just conceding because they recognize that there is lethal sitting on the board against them. Okay. Going into this game, I'm playing against a Hunter, so once again, the mulligan that you want to be looking for in this deck is Spawning Pool and Infestor. There's not really anything else that you're looking for in your mulligan. So I trade away my Zergling, and I also trade away my Nidus Worm. I do keep the Spawning Pool, obviously, because it's the 2 cards to keep. And I end up getting my Miracle Salesman and also my Infestor, which is quite good. You potentially could keep Miracle Salesman in some situations in more aggressive matchups, but in general, you are just trying to look for those 2 cards because they're significantly higher win rate if you get them, and also if you get them early as well. I end up getting my Spawning Pool, and I just use the Spawning Pool, get the proc off, which will allow me in turn 3 to be able to use my Infestor in combination with it if I need to. They end up just using their hero power, which is perfectly fine. It does signify a little bit to me that they are playing a potential Grunter Hunter list or a Buff Hunter list. I end up just playing down my Zerglings as well, just to establish a little bit of board presence. Since it is possible they could be using more of an aggressive list as well. They end up just playing down their Niall, which is obviously quite a strong card in this matchup. I play down my Infestor Coin and then Orbital Moon, because this allows me to get the Reborn and the Taunt to go onto it as well. And I'm just deciding right now whether to use my Spawning Pool to trade into them or to just leave it as active. I end up just choosing to go face, because if they do end up taking out my 3/2, and then it obviously will buff up my other dudes that are there anyway. I don't particularly want to get rid of the rush mechanic just in case I am able to get the Viper in case I'm able to get the Yodeler or things like that, because they'd be able to trade into it the second time, and it would allow me then obviously to get the Yodeler ready for them. They end up playing down their Zergling, so it's perfectly fine for me. I have the Yodeler in my hand as well, so I just use the Yodeler to proc the Infestor. It does make my minions a lot stronger, and then I send the rest of the damage face. This, obviously, since they're going to have to trade into my Infestor anyway, this is the best way to go about it. And since I couldn't really do any real clean trades, it's best for me to go on that sort of strategy for it. If I had 4/4s, I would have traded into the Niall potentially, but since I didn't, it's better just trading this way, because they still have to do 2-for-1 trades. Obviously I get lifesteal coming from it, but it also means that my Zerglings in the next turn will be even more buff as well, since they did have to trade into the Infestor anyway. And they end up just conceding because I'm in such a dominant position, especially since they are playing more of a board-centric deck, and since I've already got 3 buffs of Infestor, it's already quite strong. In addition, I'd also be able to use the Viper next turn. So I'm playing against another Hunter now. So against Hunter, or in pretty much any archetype that you use with this, you want to get Spawning Pool and the Infestor. So I end up since I have the Infestor in my opening hand, I do keep the Buccaneer, just in the off chance that I am able to use Buccaneer into Infestor. Getting the Reborn onto the Infestor is very powerful, especially since it's obviously less likely that your opponent will be able to take it out in the future turn that easily. So they end up just I end up just next turn's going to be using the Buccaneer. They do get a couple of muscle, which shows that they are using a buff, a hand buff hunter list. So it's quite likely that this 1/4 will be able to stick onto the board. But what is important that I'm not playing down any small minions that are going to be able to be stuck onto the board against them, because if I do, it means that they can obviously use the big buff going into my dudes to be able to take me out. They end up playing Niall, which is perfectly fine for me because it means that I'll be able to play down my Infestor for free. So I just play down the Infestor and just go face with it. The Infestor, obviously, getting the Reborn is going to be quite powerful for it because it'll allow me to get even more buff going into the future turns for it too. They end up just using their tracking hero power, which is perfectly fine because it means that I'm not really too concerned about them doing that. Like, it will mean that their alien encounters will be coming online a bit earlier, but since I do have Infestor on the board at the moment and I have a Viper, it's quite likely that I'll be able to use it to take out one of their important minions. They end up using the Catch of the Day as well, so it ends up being able to trade into my Buccaneer, which means that I won't be able to use it in the future turns. They have used, at this point in time, they have used 2 Cup of Muscle, so I was thinking that this was going to hit their 5 drop, but it ends up just hitting their Ranger Ghillie, which is perfectly fine, I guess. And then, because I was trying to trade fully into it. So the Ranger Ghillie sitting onto the board, they are obviously sitting in a decent position in that situation since they end up getting it down relatively for free and it doesn't cost them their turn. They end up using the Char onto my Viper, which will only give it +2/2 increase to whatever minion it landed on. I obviously still have my Infestor on the board as well, so I end up using the Nidus Worm to be able to draw me some more cards. I do have the Zerglings as well, and I use the Runes here just to be able to see if I can get the Freeze weapon. And I end up choosing the Freeze and Lifesteal weapon. Obviously, it's quite powerful for me. And I use the Lifesteal and Reborn to get my minions a bit stronger, but it also allows me to train into the Ranger Ghillie as well, while also providing some Lifesteal for me. So it's definitely a relatively strong play going into this turn, so I'm sitting with 14 damage on board. I also still do have an Infestor in hand, which is quite good for me too. So they end up using their tracking to be able to obviously get another minion onto the board, which is good for them. What I'm hoping to be doing in this turn is I'm looking to make sure that I can deal some base damage to them to put them towards lethal, especially since they don't have a reserve spot just yet. It means that I'm sitting relatively decent going into next turn without them having the possibility of being able to lethal me down. They end up using a freezing trap, which is... they end up using their secrets... their Titanforge traps, so they'll potentially be looking for a freezing trap with this. I don't think they end up hitting it since they end up choosing their cards quite slowly. I use the Yodeler first just to be able to get my buff even bigger onto my minions. It ends up being a bargain bin, so I think that they're sitting quite badly in terms of what cards they have in their hand as well. And I'm just deciding right now whether to play down my other Infestor or just whether to go face and things like that. With the Zergling being there, I end up just going face because if they do have the Grunter, they'd be able to trade into that Zergling anyway. So with the 4/6 just being on the board, it doesn't really change how much damage they're going to be able to output very much. So it's more important that I'm dealing more damage to them to be able to set up lethal in the future turn. Since my Infestor's sitting on 8 health, it means I just need the Infestor to be able to hit into a minion to be able to get lethal. They end up playing down their alien encounters, which obviously is quite good for them to be able to set up their defensive wall, because probably in the next turn or two they will have access to the Grunter, the Grunt, the Warsong Grunts, so I need to make sure that I am set up to be able to deal with it. At the moment, they also just play down a Catch of the Day as well, which means they're also reducing their damage output by doing that. With the 2-1 obviously being there, it means that they can't use the Grunt to be able to deal extra damage to it. But it means that they're potentially setting up for a reserve spot or a couple of muscle onto their Grunt. I end up drawing into a Brood Queen here, so I end up playing down my Baneling, and I put the Baneling down, then I equip my weapon. I do recognize here that it's 4 damage rather than 3, so I end up just getting lethal from that. I forgot that there was the Runes of Darkness, but obviously it ended up getting the win. But yeah, if you've enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and bye for now.